The chair scraped loudly as Thomas pulled it back, the sound sharper than he intended, and for a brief moment the room seemed to notice his hesitation. Across the long banquet table sat a woman in a faded black dress, her hands folded carefully as if she were afraid to take up too much space. Thomas glanced at the empty seats further down, calculating distance, comfort, appearances, and without fully admitting why, he chose to move away from her. He told himself it was nothing, just preference, just a long day, but something in his chest tightened as he sat elsewhere. Have you ever made a choice like that without thinking, only to feel it echo later when the room grows quiet and you're left alone with yourself? If you were there, what would you have done differently, or would you have done the same and justified it just as easily? The dinner was held in a modest event hall outside Columbus, Ohio, organized by a local church that partnered with a community outreach program. Thomas had been invited because he was a successful real estate developer, a man whose name carried weight and whose donations were appreciated. He wore a tailored navy suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being admired. The night was meant to celebrate generosity, yet his mind was elsewhere, replaying the image of the woman he avoided. Her name, he later learned, was Margaret. She was a widow who lived on the edge of town in a small rental duplex that needed more repairs than she could afford. But at that moment, she was simply a presence he did not want to engage with, a reminder of fragility he preferred to keep at arm's length. Margaret had arrived early and chosen her seat quietly. She had learned over the years not to inconvenience anyone, not to expect much. Her husband, Robert, had died 3 years earlier after a long illness that drained their savings and left her navigating a world that felt colder without him. She worked part-time at a library, shelving books, and smiling at children who reminded her of the family she never had. That evening, she wore the same dress she had worn to church for months, freshly pressed and mended at the hem. When Thomas moved away from her, she noticed, of course she did, but she lowered her gaze and breathed through the familiar ache of being overlooked. As the program continued, speakers talked about faith, service, and the importance of seeing one another. Thomas clapped at the right moments, nodded thoughtfully, and checked his phone when he thought no one was watching. Yet his attention kept drifting back to Margaret. He saw how she listened intently, how she bowed her head during prayer, how she smiled gently when volunteers passed out plates of food. There was no bitterness in her expression, only a quiet endurance that unsettled him. He tried to dismiss the feeling, reminding himself that he had worked hard for his success, that he was not responsible for everyone's hardship. Still, the unease remained, growing heavier with each passing minute. Later that evening, a sudden storm swept in, pounding rain against the windows and knocking out the power. The room fell into darkness, punctuated by soft murmurs and the scrape of chairs as people shifted uneasily. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the hall. In the confusion, Thomas felt a hand brush against his arm. It was Margaret, steadying herself as she stood. She offered him a small, apologetic smile, the kind that asked for nothing. In that brief, unguarded moment, something cracked open inside him. He saw not a poor widow, not an inconvenience, but a human being navigating the same uncertain darkness as everyone else. When the organizers suggested waiting out the storm together, people gathered closer, sharing space and warmth. Thomas found himself standing near Margaret again, this time without the shield of his polished image. He learned, through quiet observation and gentle listening rather than direct conversation, that she volunteered at the library's children's reading hour, that she baked bread on Sundays and shared it with neighbors, that she carried her grief with grace rather than complaint. He noticed how she helped an elderly man find a seat, how she reassured a young mother whose child was restless but safe in her arms. The child laughed softly, and Margaret's eyes softened in response, a fleeting moment of joy that spoke volumes. As the rain continued, Thomas's thoughts drifted to his own life. He had grown up in a small town in Indiana, raised by parents who taught him the value of hard work and kindness. Somewhere along the way, ambition had crowded out empathy. He remembered his mother volunteering at shelters, his father fixing neighbors' cars for free. He wondered when he had started measuring people by what they could offer him rather than who they were. Standing there, surrounded by strangers brought together by circumstance, he felt a quiet shame settle over him, not crushing but instructive, urging him to look again. When the lights finally came back on, the evening resumed, but Thomas was no longer the same man who had pulled his chair away earlier. He returned to the table and took the seat beside Margaret without hesitation. He did not make a show of it, did not seek forgiveness or praise. He simply sat, present and attentive, sharing the space he had once avoided. Margaret acknowledged him with a nod and a gentle smile, offering him a piece of the bread she had brought to share. It was warm and homemade, and as he accepted it, he felt an unexpected gratitude well up inside him. The rest of the night passed quietly. There were no dramatic confessions, no grand gestures. Instead, there was a subtle shift, a recognition that dignity is not granted by wealth or status but inherent in every person. Thomas left the event later than planned, the storm having cleared the air and washed the streets clean. As he drove home, he replayed the evening in his mind, not with regret alone but with resolve. He thought about the empty seat he had chosen earlier and the fullness he felt now, simply from being willing to sit beside someone different from himself. In the weeks that followed, Thomas made changes that surprised even him. He began supporting the outreach program more actively, not just with money but with time. He visited the library and watched Margaret read to children, their faces lit with curiosity and comfort. He saw how small acts of kindness rippled outward, creating connections that money alone could not buy. Margaret, for her part, continued her life as she always had, grateful but not dependent, open but not demanding. Their paths crossed occasionally, each interaction grounded in mutual respect rather than obligation. One evening, as Thomas walked past the community center, he noticed a row of chairs set up for another event. He paused, remembering the sound of that chair scraping, the choice he had made without thinking. This time, he took a seat wherever there was room, beside whoever happened to be there. It felt simple, almost insignificant, yet profoundly different. He understood now that compassion often begins with proximity, with the willingness to share space and see one another fully. As you reflect on this story, consider the moments in your own life when you have turned away, when fear or pride guided your steps. What if you chose differently next time, even in the smallest way? If this story stirred something in you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if it truly touched your heart, you are warmly invited to like, comment, share, and subscribe, so more stories of quiet compassion and second chances can be shared.